Hello, I feel pretty uncomfortable filming this before a camera and nobody in the audience. I am a teacher that uses questioning technique almost entirely. Very little the time do I lecture the entire time, but I'm going to attempt to do that today. I was given about 30 minutes to do this lesson, and today we'll probably take about 20 because 10 of those minutes would be answering questions and using the audience to teach the class. But I'll do the best I can. And I'm pretty sure that nobody's going to complain if it's a little shorter. Today we're going to talk about the gift of evangelism. This of course comes from Ephesians chapter 4, 11 through 12. People are given various gifts, and one of them is evangelism. But we're told in Matthew 28, 18 through 20 that we are all to go into all the world and preach the gospel. And so there seems to be a little tension there between those two verses. We're all supposed to do evangelism, but yet some people have the gift of evangelism. So I'd like to think about that as we go through this lesson today and talk about people that have that gift and what can we all do. As a little kid, I grew up in a pretty legalistic world, and I would hear sermons that said we're all supposed to win souls, and then we sang songs about everybody winning souls. And as a little kid, I was pretty concerned because I was pretty sure that the Lord was going to damn me for sure if I didn't win souls, but I was also pretty sure that I didn't know how to do it. And so the fear of being lost forces you to think about being a soul winner, supposedly, but being a soul winner was something that I did not feel like I could do. I was pretty shy, and I had a lack of confidence, and I wasn't sure what you were supposed to do. Now, going into the profession of being a school teacher has taken care of the confidence problem. It's pretty difficult to teach for 38 years and not have some confidence. But what do you do if you feel like you should have the gift of evangelism and maybe you don't? Well, everybody can tell what God has done for them. Some people are just much better at it and are much more driven. So we're going to look at that today as we go through this lesson. If we look at Acts 8, 5 through 8, and I'm going to pick this up and read it because I'm also going blind as I'm getting old. Acts 8, 5 through 8, Philip went down to a city in Samaria and proclaimed the Christ there. When the crowds heard Philip and saw the miraculous signs he did, they all paid close attention to what he had said. With shrieks, evil spirits came out of many, and many paralytics and cripples were healed. So there was great joy in that city. It's clear that Philip had the gift of being an evangelist. We're going to see him in just a few minutes with the Ethiopian eunuch. And it seems like for Philip, God put the Ethiopian eunuch in his way so that because God knew that Philip would be the one that could preach the gospel to the eunuch. Philip was clearly gifted as an evangelist, and we know that because if we look at the Bible in Acts chapter 28, verse 8 and 9, and give me a second to look at that, 21, 8 and 9, pardon me, Acts 21, 8 and 9, we see Philip again. Leaving the next day, we reached Caesarea and stayed at the house of Philip the evangelist, one of the 7. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. And so we see here that Philip is called the evangelist. In fact, in the Bible, that's the only place that anyone is called an evangelist. So Philip clearly had the gift. So let's talk about the gift a little bit and how we know. We're a little afraid that maybe we don't, know if we have the gift. I remember as a little kid, they were talking about the talents, and they would talk about the 5-talent man and the 2-talent man and the 1-talent man. And I was thinking, do I have any talent at all? Well, that's something that comes along as we get older. We begin to realize that there are some things that we can do pretty well. So how would we identify having the gift of being an evangelist? Well, one thing is an evangelist has a strong desire to share Christ with others and see them won to Christ. I think we all should have that desire. I don't think that's something that's necessarily confined just to the person that's got the gift of evangelism. But I also think that lots of people have it or some people have it in the church more than others. And so a strong desire to share Christ. Also, is not embarrassed to share Christ with others, even those who are strangers. Again, none of us should be embarrassed about Jesus. We should not be afraid to tell other people. In fact, we probably need in this day and age to become less and less embarrassed about that, because we see that it's becoming a thing that the people around us would like to try to embarrass us into silence. However, there are some people that just absolutely are unembarrassed to say whatever comes to mind. And if those people have the gift of evangelism and they learn to use that gift so that they aren't the kind of people that are a turnoff by their lack of embarrassment, then they can really do a lot of good. And another thing, evangelist has effectively brought many to Christ in the past. Now, if you are young in the faith and you have not brought anybody to Christ, you have no idea yet if you have the gift of evangelism or not. You know, it may be that in 10 years or in 20 years that you know that this is a gift that you have. Others, you know, you just know you're born with it. Some people can sell anything. I've heard people say you can sell snow to Eskimos. If you have that ability, you need to use it for Jesus and not to sell snow to Eskimos. I mean, it's something that we need to make sure that we are unafraid to do, and we use it if we are unafraid to do it. And the last one on my list here is able to minister to non-Christians in such a way they feel comfortable with him and can relate to him. Some people are very close to God, but non-Christians find themselves very uncomfortable in their presence. Some people, that is just their fate. If that's you, first of all, we shouldn't use that as an excuse to not share the gospel. But some of us are better at other things than we are at sharing. Our missions ministry at Auburn Church of Christ is successful because of people who have the gift that we're going to talk about next, the gift of giving. This gift of giving enables people that have the gift of evangelism to be more effective. And so, because we're a body and we all have different parts and functions, some of us can enable the evangelist more than we can do evangelism. And so that's something that we shouldn't be particularly ashamed of. Of course, all of us should still evangelize, however. I've got 3 people here that I've thought about, that I've encountered over my lifetime. 1 or 2 of them you know, and a couple that you don't. And I want to talk about their gift of evangelism because they have made a difference in my life, but more so, they have shown me and others how to be evangelistic. The first one is a fellow that you probably never heard of. His name is Clifford Dixon. Clifford Dixon just passed recently. He was in his late 70s, and he spent his life sharing the gospel. Now, his name was Clifford Dixon, so, you know, of course, all of us around the community called him Clifford. When Clifford was in his 70s, he took over a little church with about 7 members out in the country, and that little church is near and dear to my heart because it's called the Holmesville Church of Christ. And I happen to be a Holmes. My mother was a Holmes. And so we were all interested to see what Clifford was going to do at this little church whose peak membership was probably 50 in the 30s or 40s, and now it's dwindled down to 7. So Clifford Dixon took over the Holmesville Church of Christ as the minister. The little church has no elders, has a couple of men that help lead. Immediately, Clifford Dixon started visiting everybody in the community, absolutely tirelessly. People would come up to me when I came out to my farm and say, you know, Clifford Dixon came by my house today, and you know, it almost sounded like he was so persistent that people started kind of hiding from him. Well, it wasn't long before there were 14 or 15 at the Holmesville Church of Christ. Clifford had ended up having about 8 or 10 baptisms out there, and many people that had quit going to church had started going again. When Clifford died a year ago, the church had about 25 members. So he had managed, because of just determination to share Jesus with that community, he had managed to increase the size of that church 4 times in about 5 or 6 years. This was Clifford's last job. Before that, he had planted a church in Century, Florida, where there wasn't one, and that church has grown to about 70 or 80 by now. So this man, with his determination to share Jesus, was very successful. Another fellow that was like that was a gentleman that I met in Europe, and he's called the Dean of Foreign Missions in the Church of Christ, Otis Gatewood. Otis Gatewood brought me to Europe because Otis Gatewood brought everybody to Europe. If Otis Gatewood had been doing evangelism in Antarctica, he would have brought everybody to Antarctica. He's one of those kind of guys that when he did it, or when he was responsible for it, he felt such a burden that everybody felt like it was the most important thing in the world. Otis was the first U.S. missionary, along with a couple of others, into Germany after World War II. They planted churches all over Germany. The churches grew really big. And when I was in Austria with Otis in 1979, I asked him, where are all the churches in Germany that you founded? Because some of the churches in Germany were small at that time. And Otis said, most of the members died and went to heaven. I said, what are you talking about? He said they were so shell-shocked from the bombing that many of them died very early. But during the time that those people were recovering from World War II, Otis was a person that had made a huge impact into that area. He eventually moved to Vienna because Vienna was the gateway to the East, and he spent the next 30 years of his life sending missions and going on missions into the Soviet bloc. Before long, however, Otis had, with his desire to evangelize, he had irritated the communist government so much with his success and with his Texas demeanor that he was kind of brash sometimes, that he could go into none of those communist countries anymore. So Otis was the kind of, we've got to temper what we do. Otis was the kind of guy that was so determined to do evangelism that he decided that after the Berlin Wall fell that he was going to go tell Gorbachev in Russia, Mikhail Gorbachev, about Jesus. Everybody told Otis. Now, Otis was in his late 70s at this time, and everybody said, Otis, there's no way you're going to meet Mikhail Gorbachev. Well, about 4 or 5 weeks later, Otis and Mikhail Gorbachev had a meeting. And Otis was not content to just talk to Gorbachev. He told Gorbachev he needed to be baptized. Straight out. Gorbachev told him he had been baptized, and then they argued about what kind of baptism it was. Otis was a person that had a burden of evangelism. Now, some evangelists rub others the wrong way because they're so determined to spread the gospel. They said in his day, Otis supported about 60 or 70 missionaries by going to churches in America and raising money for them. One lady said, when Otis Gatewood's coming to church, I leave my checkbook at home because if I don't, I'll end up giving him some money and I'll go broke. And so Otis was determined and capable of making it happen. You've got to have that determination if you have the gift of being an evangelist. The last person on my list of evangelists I'd like to share with you is one that works just right up the road, and his name is Buddy Bell. And I had the honor of, Buddy's now the minister at Landmark Church of Christ in Montgomery. I had the privilege of working with Buddy when I was a youth minister at Capitol Heights Church of Christ in Montgomery, and Buddy was then the youth minister at Landmark Church of Christ. Interesting about Buddy, now Landmark was much bigger than Capitol Heights, and I could manage to get about 10 or 12 people together if I pulled in some college students and maybe even a person that was out of college or two, that we could manage to get a youth group together of about 12 or 13 or 14, and we would work really hard to do that. Buddy would bring 100 or 120 to every youth thing. So one day I said, Buddy, how in the world do you bring so many? He said, I pass a sign-up list around, and about 30 sign up. He said, I don't worry about those 30 anymore. I go after the 70 that haven't signed up. And before long, I have 100. He had an absolute burning desire to have everybody possible involved in the ministry. That gift of evangelism led to many baptisms. When I worked as youth minister at Landmark Church of Christ in the 1990s, and when I left Landmark had about 350 members, and our youth group had about 50 members, and so I felt pretty good about that. But you know, I always remembered that was about half of what Buddy had 15 years before. Buddy came to Landmark as the preacher when I was youth minister there, and the church grew in the next 10 years from 350 to 1,000. Some people just have that gift of bringing people to Jesus and succeeding with what they do. Lesson. The person that has the gift of evangelism must be somebody that's very careful with his life. His life must be consistent with the message. That's not to say that some don't have the gift and struggle with their life. You can have this gift and be very good at evangelism, but you can struggle with things in your life. Now, we all struggle with things in our life, but some people struggle with big things in our life. So you've got to be very careful, if you have this gift, that you are very careful to make sure that what you teach goes by the Bible. Remembering that you are a great salesman and you're able to sell things to people, or you're able to share things with people and get results. And so you've got to let Jesus speak through you and let Jesus be responsible, let the Spirit be responsible for the souls that you win and not you. You're just sharing the gospel. You're not doing anything and everything, good or bad, to share Jesus. You got to be careful. You know, there's some people in the Bible that really struggle with their lives, and yet they were really servants of God. And so let's don't start looking through our life and saying, oh, these things disqualify me. Samson was one of the judges of Israel. But if you study his life, and we ain't got time to do that today, you'll see that Samson had all kinds of things that he did that were contrary to what God wanted him to do. But God still used him. And God can still use us, even though we have things in our life that are not consistent. But that doesn't excuse us from continuing to sin. We need to make sure that we do everything we can to clean up our lives. Another person that just was pretty much compelled to evangelize was Jonah. If you read the book of Jonah, everybody knows that Jonah tried to flee instead of going to Nineveh. The reason Jonah did not want to go to Nineveh is he knew that if he preached to Nineveh, God would save the city. God would save the city, not Jonah. Jonah knew that if he preached, though, if he was the messenger, the Ninevites would repent. And you see, Nineveh was a huge country that was destined to destroy Israel. And so, possibly for that reason, but Jonah did not want to go to Nineveh. But God compelled him to go, and Jonah then went through Nineveh preaching, and before long the whole city had repented, just like Jonah had predicted that it would do. Because he knew that the power of God was great. He also knew that he had the gift of teaching, and so Jonah actually tried to run from that burden. An evangelist then must develop a special passion for the lost and feel obligated to share the gospel. Share the gospel. See, that's one thing we have to really be careful with if we're an evangelist. Not build my own empire, not build my own church, not grow this or that, but let God work through you. Very, very important that you keep that under control. Very easy for us to start thinking that somehow we have done it if we have the gift of evangelism, and that will invalidate, even though we may be very successful, there's lots of souls that will be harmed because of our words. In Romans 1:14, Paul says, I'm obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. Verse 15, that's why I'm so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes, first for the Jew and then for the Gentile. Paul said the power of God is in the gospel, not in me. Paul was pretty clear to call himself in 2 Corinthians a broken vessel. We have got to remember our humility. All of us have seen that preacher who was very good at growing a church and also had a real struggle with his own humility. And so that's something that's scary because, you know, it's like if you live in a family that has a propensity for alcoholism and you start drinking, there should be a great deal of fear there. Because if you have genetics for that, that could be a real problem. If you have genetics for pride If you have a problem with pride and you're real good at evangelism, you need to really continually evaluate yourself. In fact, it might be a good idea to plan 2 or 3 weeks every year to step away, to do a sabbatical, and to evaluate yourself, to make sure that you aren't doing this for yourself, but that you're doing it for the right reason. Now, a person that's an evangelist cannot be quiet ever. I guess even if you're on that sabbatical, if somebody comes up, it won't be very long before you start talking about Jesus with them. In 1 Corinthians 9:16, Paul says, "Yet when I preach the gospel, I cannot boast, for I am compelled to preach." Sounds like Jonah, except that Paul was not negative about the Gentiles that he was preaching to mostly. He was very desirous to do it. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. And that's the attitude of an evangelistic person. Just cannot be quiet. The last part of this lesson is on how can we get better at evangelism. This is to all of us. If you have the gift of evangelism and you're sitting there at the Auburn Church of Christ or whoever watches this, and you aren't using it, then you need to. I mean, you've got to train yourself and make sure that you're out there doing what you should do, but you need to go out there and start doing it. So what in the world can we do for all of us to get better? First of all, we must have a sense of urgency for the lost. Urgency overcomes our timidness. We have got to see a lost world. Today we live in a world that says anything you do is okay, don't judge, and so we stop looking at people as lost and we start saying everybody's okay. If you don't have an urgency of the lostness of the world, you're not going to be a very good evangelist. And so you need to see there is an urgency to it. And number two, we must be willing to invest time and really care for people. One of the Student Center t-shirts that made an impact on me as a youth minister and campus minister when I did it was the one that had 1 Thessalonians 2:8 on it. We share our lives as well as the gospel. In fact, I think I stole that and put it on a t-shirt of my own. Sorry, I repent. But we share the gospel as well as our lives. Folks should know you care. You go to a place and you share your life with them. You care about those people. It's not that you look, it's so easy sometimes to go on a mission trip, and if you're not careful, to think that you're superior and that's why you're there. As I said before, the people you're talking with are on the same level that you are. That you just happen to know about the gospel and they don't, and you're sharing that with them. Not that you've come with a moral superiority, but that you don't mind at all sharing your life with these people. So we must share our lives with the people. And then number three, we must trust God's Spirit to place people in our path who need the gospel. We've got to trust God to put them there. Tell God every day, put somebody in my path, Lord, and let me see them. And then give me a chance to share the gospel. It may not happen every day, but if you're a person that knows one person that somebody that nobody else in the church knows, then that's the person that God may have put in your path for you to share with them. Remembering that there are a lot of people that will help you, that will encourage you, that you can even recruit to help you share the gospel with that person. So as a church, we've got to always be ready to back up those with the gift of evangelism and those that are maybe not as gifted, but they're still doing evangelism. And so I have a conclusion here, and we will close this lesson. I appreciate the opportunity again to teach it, and I wish I were teaching it in person. Hopefully that will not be much longer. If you have the gift of evangelism, use it and get better at it. And be careful that you watch yourself, that the sin of pride does not overcome and destroy the good that you're doing. Use it and get better. Don't waste it. If you know that you're a salesman and you're wasting that sales ability, the fearlessness that you can talk to people about something, then try using it for Jesus. Remembering that Jesus is going to work through you. It's not you that's doing it, it's the Spirit. working through you. But don't waste it. We all have to have it a little. Pray that God will increase all of our desires for evangelism. Only then will we see the church grow due to our evangelistic nature here and across the world. Again, thank you for your time today, and God bless.